Hi guys, welcome back to the usual place. Now, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland last week, it was clear that the gloves were off when it came to dealing with US President Donald Trump. Now, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney was blunt in his criticism of the direction things are heading in, saying that there was a rupture in the world order. French President Emmanuel Macron warned of a shift towards a world without rules, adding, "We prefer respect to bullies." Neither leader mentioned Mr. Trump directly. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump spent much of his one-hour speech taking aim at European countries, reiterating his demand for Greenland and calling the people who bought windmills stupid. Now, it feels clear that global diplomacy has become more confrontational. So what does that mean for a small country like Singapore? Now, to help me answer that question, I have two guests. And the first one is Lin Suling, who's my colleague and opinion editor at the Straits Times. Thank you for being here.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Professor Joseph Liow. Thank you for being here too.
Sure, hello.
Hello. Okay, so we started off talking about the World Economic Forum in Davos, and actually it wrapped on Friday, and Suling, you were there. And you even managed to get into the room where Mr. Trump was, and it was called, some have touted it as the most anticipated speech of 2026 Davos Forum. What was it like being there? Tell me, did you have to queue for hours like other people?
Oh my goodness, it was a human crush situation. I had to elbow people to get in. It was like the whole of Davos descended upon that small Congress hall that Trump was in. It could hold about 600, 700 people, but thousands of people who were around Davos came to see him. He was clearly the main event. And you got to understand, Davos is huge. It's like a world expo. You've got firms from Meta, Palantir, Infosys, CEOs, 800 of them, 65 heads of state coming down to see Mr. Trump. And I think what he delivered at that room was a big bombastic speech. You know, he loves big, beautiful speeches. But I think the spectacle around Mr. Trump also reaffirmed the importance of the World Economic Forum as a platform. For many years, people have been asking whether the World Economic Forum was languishing. This year, very clearly, under the interim CEO, chair of the World Economic Forum, Larry Fink, he brought many big names here. He brought NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, there was Palantir's Alex Karp, big names like Elon Musk also, and Mr. Trump could hold his own. He commanded the attention. People were hoping to hear what he might say about Greenland. He just also captured Venezuela leader Nicolas Maduro. So people in the room trying to figure out what's next, what the US president would say.
Well, he made many controversial statements, which is not controversial for him to do so, but he arrowed many people, as I said, and was he heckled at some points? Did people boo him? Because he wasn't very kind to, and it's very, for me, to watch it unbecoming of a world leader. So what was the reaction like from the audience?
So I think everybody started off with a lot of respect. He made some jibes when he called people, either Europeans, stupid losers. There was a bit of a quip, bit of a smirk. I think some people in the room might have agreed with him. Although generally speaking, after the event, when I spoke to European business leaders, a lot of them were flabbergasted, obviously. They felt that, the whole Greenland incident was something altogether different. Liberation Day was a joke, but Greenland was about sovereignty, it was existential for the Europeans, and to see the US take such a stance, such an open stance, I think something shattered that day. But I think if you talk to the Asians in the room who've been watching Mr. Trump for many years now, used to his jibes were further away perhaps, but the sense was this is the reality of our new operating environment. So the room was clearly split.
So speaking of reality of what we are living in, right? I want to turn it to Joseph, because another speech that grabbed the headline was Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, right? So, and he indirectly called out Mr. Trump for a rupture in the post-war order, and basically he said enough was enough, right? And he also spoke about how middle power should respond to Trump's way of engaging with allies. So what did you make of Mr. Carney's speech, and then watching Trump after? Did you think Mr. Carney was exaggerating about the rupture in the world order?
Well, I think first and foremost, it was a pretty good speech, and not just the substance, the content, but the way it was delivered as well, right? I mean, clearly a leader with gravitas, with an important message, and he delivered it very articulately. Yeah. As far as the substance of the speech is concerned, I think it was basically a reflection of, I suppose, what people already knew, right? Certainly leaders or anyone who has been sort of following or involved in global affairs. But the fact of the matter was that Carney used the World Economic Forum stage, which is a significant platform, regardless of recent sort of challenges that it had to go through, a significant platform to make as sort of unequivocal a statement as he did about the state of the world and the changes that are before us. I think that was very significant and very weighty. Yeah, and it certainly got a lot of people thinking, got a lot of people talking. You see a lot of commentaries on it. In fact, curiously, just this morning I was chatting with an old Canadian friend who's in town, and he was telling me he got into a Grab taxi, and he ended up talking with the taxi driver, the Grab driver, about Carney's speech. And the Grab driver had listened to the entire speech and could summarize it and give his views on it. So the Singaporeans are interested in the substance of the speech as well, right? So yes, indeed, important speech. But then the question now is, of course, what next? Yeah. So your point, Natasha, that Carney also talked about what middle powers should do. I think that's very significant. It's not just about middle powers, it's everyone, right? Everyone has to make the necessary, the requisite adjustments now, because you're dealing with the United States that is still the most powerful, most influential country in the world. Let's not have any illusions otherwise. But at the same time, quite clearly, feeling that the way that they want to deal with the rest of the world has to change, right? It's a more transactional approach. It's not so much what we can do together. They might be interested in that, but the starting premise is what you can do for me, right? And everyone is adjusting to that new reality, and they will continue to do so, even though they do also need to sort of diversify their relationships, middle powers starting to work together and work with smaller countries. All that is well and good. It reflects a new landscape. But it is difficult to imagine that landscape without the United States still being a major player in that. Yeah. So it's a question of managing the relationship with the US, certainly in the short term, the next few years with this particular presidency, but at the same time expanding the sort of options that you have.
So what happens like now? Because what we are seeing is that America's like using its might, right? Like as you said, biggest country, strongest country. Is there space for walking? Is there still space for walking the middle path? Like just balancing both sides versus what Carney was trying to do, which was like he was outright and saying like, well, he didn't address Mr. Trump by name. He said this is enough. Like we don't need to pander essentially to the US anymore. So, but should countries follow what he's saying?
Yeah. Well, there's space, but the reality is that space is getting smaller, right? I mean, Carney said what he said, very impressive. Trump didn't like it, as we know. And what did Trump say? I'm going to tariff Canada, right? So that's how this particular administration is going around handling situations where they are not, situations which they're not happy with, they're not content with. One tool that is being wielded quite liberally by the president is tariffs, right? We know that the Supreme Court is supposed to rule whether or not the tariffs are legal or not legal based on the Constitution. But we also know that, it's not just tariffs, or as in IEPA tariffs, or the one about national security. But Trump has an entire sort of toolbox, tariff-related toolbox that he can use, right? Targeted tariffs and the like, which he probably will use. He's made it very clear that it's the most beautiful, the most beautiful word in the English language, something like that, right? So he's going to do that. And what that means is countries, as they try to adjust, it's also a question of how to avoid getting in the crosshairs of the United States. Yeah. And And it seems that the way to do it is to ensure that you have enough of a value proposition for the US, for this particular administration, right? Because they want to know what you are prepared to offer them to contribute to their effort to make America great again, right? So countries have to think about what they have to bring to the table. You probably want to space it out, don't put everything on the table all at once. Keep a bit of the powder, so to speak, dry, so that you hope not to be in the harsh spotlight of the Trump administration. But if for whatever reason you are, straight away you can say, by the way, I'm going to invest in your country X amount, Y amount, whatever, that sort of thing. Yeah. So there needs to be that kind of positioning of the resources that you are able to, I suppose, set aside to deal with this relationship under this president.
So I think it's also quite important to add here that one of the key reasons why last year was a year of record growth for many places, including Singapore, 4.8% GDP growth, is also the AI boom. And if you look at where the AI boom was from, it was from America. And we often look at headlines and the news and look at Trump and see a lot of the bluster, a lot of the geopolitical uncertainty. But we also must not lose sight of the fact that the US still remains the most powerful economy, the source of innovation, whether it's artificial intelligence, quantum computing. It's also looking at nuclear fission. And a lot of that offset the tariffs, the uncertainty that Trump created in 2025. And when you look at, US companies, there are so many here, almost 6,000 in Singapore, and they contribute to our jobs. They hire our people. They hire a lot of SMEs here as well, that it's important not to take a very black and white view and say, I'm going to de-risk from the US. I don't really like what Trump is saying, and I'm going to move away from the US. That should not be the case. Yeah. And I think the challenge is that the headlines might give the impression that that might be it. One speech that was important at Davos that everybody sort of missed because of the drama and attention on Trump and Carney was Ursula von der Leyen. So the EU chief talked, and her speech was full of substance. So she was at Davos and she had just come from inking the EU-Mercosur trade deal, which we know now was held up by the EU courts. But even then, there's a commitment from the EU to progress on it, at least to implement it progressively from March onwards. And then she said, in Davos, I'm going to go to India next week. And that's the mother of all trade deals, right? And it's huge because for so long, so many countries wanted to capture India, to conclude a trade deal with India. And the EU had that. And so I think it's important to see that as perhaps a necessary evolution of the EU's strategy in broadening its economic partnerships and investment ties and trade ties beyond the US, not de-risking from the US necessarily, but in order to create resilience in its supply chains, ensuring that it has more opportunities elsewhere, more connected around the world, and a more balanced economic relationship with the world as a whole. So I think important to make sure that we don't confuse how we might feel about what Donald Trump might be saying and miss the opportunities that a booming US economy offers, but also look at the expansion of trade ties as an opportunity and a necessity, in fact, today.
So what you're saying is that we absolutely cannot ignore America. We can't ice it out for now until Trump, finishes his next 3 years, right? But so what you're saying, it's not possible at all to remotely function without having ties to America at all for any country, or for Singapore in particular?
I mean, it's the largest economy in the world, right? It's still the most innovative economy in the world. For Singapore, for Southeast Asia, it's the largest source of investments. I mean, the biggest MNCs, are American MNCs, and that's only the sort of economic side of things, right? There's also the security side of the equation, right?
I think just for Singapore, we have a lot of military ties with them. I think that's like 1,000 soldiers trained there, and then we have
I mean, we have
Air Force,
deep, long-standing defense relations with the US, and our position, and actually it's not just Singapore's position. I mean, across the region, no one talks about how the US should leave the region, right? I mean, yes, we have issues with America over this and that, sure, right? But at the end of the day, in terms of maintaining the balance of power in the region, I think everyone accepts, some grudgingly, some less grudgingly, but everyone accepts the US role is critical. I mean, even the Chinese, I mean, the Chinese obviously are in a competitive relationship with the US. But I've always wondered, is it in China's interest for the US to leave the region? Think about it. If the US leaves the region, what do you think, say, the Japanese will do, right? Are they going to say, oh, okay, then we accept Chinese hegemony and leadership in the region? A Japan that is surrounded by Russia, North Korea, China, all three which have issues with them, all three nuclear armed. What do we think the Japanese would do? What would you do if you were the leader of Japan? If the United States says, okay, sorry, we've decided that we're going to send our ships and our men home, you guys handle your security yourselves, right? And if the Japanese do what we think they should do, what does that do for the Chinese, right? The Chinese will get worried. The Japanese will get worried. Everyone gets worried. So the United States has a very clear and important role in the security architecture for the region. I mean, the challenge really is now that because of the more transactional nature of the relationship, what the Americans want is not that they want to leave the region. They want everyone else to bear a larger share of the burden of that security commitment and presence in the region. And actually, it makes me think about the point that Suling raised, which I think it's very true. You look at how the Europeans have dealt with the issue or reacted to the issue, and how the East Asians have dealt with the issues, the so-called friends and allies of the US. I mean, the Europeans, because of Greenland, because of Ukraine, I mean, I suppose they feel a sense of betrayal, or, that, how can the US jeopardize a long-standing transatlantic relationship in this way and undermine the security of Europe and undermine NATO and all that sort of stuff, right? In East Asia, we're not happy with it, but we realize that this is the nature of things. So everyone is having internal discussions now. How do we increase our share of the defense burden, right, in order to keep the US engaged in the region? So I think there's very clearly a different tone in terms of how this region has reacted to this change and how Europe has reacted to this change.
I mean, just picking up on your point also, right? In Asia, our regional security architecture, as you mentioned, is quite inclusive. I think we've always started from the perspective that it would be anchored by Southeast Asia for Southeast Asia, right? And so you have ASEAN, and that ASEAN regional security architecture, alphabet soup. We don't really like it. Sounds very bureaucratic, sounds very cheap. What is this thing that they have? But it has worked in large part to anchor the US here, the Chinese here, to give the Chinese a constructive role in the region as they grow in economic weight. Sort of create those channels for dialogue as well, such that when tensions get out of hand, at least they have an option to talk. The Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore really helps with that. I think in Asia, the approach towards geopolitics has been very different because we understand that they are both realities, both US and China. And I think, like, picking up on the point that you mentioned also, the US has provided a stabilizing role since World War II. In Southeast Asia, at least, the US's military presence here, it's also helped train our SAF soldiers up, and it has also access to very important technology. And so, without the US, I think I cannot conceive of an Asia without the US.
So what does this mean for Singaporeans now? Because I know, like, many Singaporeans aren't foreign policy wonks, right? So all of this can, like, sort of feel foreign or a bit distant. It's not happening. Nothing really is happening to us beyond the tariffs as we know it. I mean, generally. What does this mean for us, you and me? Because the Grab driver that you were chatting with actually clearly is worried maybe about Mr. Trump in some way.
Yeah.
So what does it mean for us
but
here?
my friend was chatting with the Grab
Oh,
driver,
friend,
not
your
me.
friend, sorry,
But
yes.
nonetheless, I mean, that's an interesting question. At a very sort of rudimentary level, I think, not to belittle the, very consequential changes in the world, but it's entertaining.
Yeah.
Singaporeans are entertained. I have conversations with my friends, and everyone at some level very amused that you have this character leading the most powerful country in the world, and it's almost surreal, right?
Because we wouldn't imagine it happening here. I don't think we have, our leaders act this way.
It says a lot about the electoral system in the US, by the way. Yeah, but that's a separate
conversation.
Separate
Yes.
conversation. But I think, jokes aside, there are some harsh realities that are confronting us, right? I mean, most of us, you look at the Singaporean population. I think the sort of median age of Singaporean citizens is, I don't know, mid-40s to late 40s, I think. What that means is most of us have grown up, come of age during globalization, right?
Yeah.
That's the world that we knew, right? Open markets, free movement of people, capital, goods, etc., right? And Singapore thrived in that world, yeah? So that is starting to change a bit. Doesn't mean that, therefore, it's going to be disaster, but it requires us to adjust to it, right? Which requires flexibility of not just outlook, but of purpose as well, right? So our leaders have talked about, we really have to start thinking about new markets, new sources of growth. Technology and AI is going to be a major, or is already a major driver of growth. And we are very much at the forefront, or trying to be at the forefront of that, which is great, except for the fact that there's the issue between environment sustainability and the gargantuan energy needs of a high-tech AI-driven economy. But again, that's a separate discussion. So Singapore has to adjust to all that. But at the same time, think about it this way. I don't have the figures, but off the top of my head, but the costs and the uncertainties of all these adjustments against looking at the US and saying that, okay, we need to do A, B, C in order to be on site with the US, and that requires some investments on our part. Not necessarily bad, given the nature of the US economy and the US stock market now. You get the cost-benefit analysis, you might realize that actually, as uncertain as it is, the situation with the US
Look
is
at the S&P 500.
it's no less uncertain, sort of going deep into that alternative world, because we don't really know what that alternative world is going to end up being, right? So this question of adjusting, question of toggling to and trying to prioritize multiple sort of approaches, I think is going to be critical. So we need to be very nimble.
But beyond the economics of it, I mean, I'm going back to the Grab driver conversation that your friend had. I mean, it also shows that people are concerned about Trump, not just economically, but also perhaps because he talks about Greenland, about wanting to get it, and then what he did in Venezuela without approval from Congress. And then, I think people do see the US as a sort of bully, not just with the terrorists, but also in okay, they can one day wake up and decide, okay, he wants to come from my country. I mean, what does this mean for Singapore? What if some big country, maybe not even the US, suddenly decides that Singapore should belong to them?
I mean, what you're speaking about really is a bigger, broader thing. The bigger, broader thing is the multilateral trading order that we're so used to, that provided stability, stable rules, tariff rates. You're not going to wake up one day and businesses have seen a huge increase in tariffs. Now that will really impact firms here, because that means that your costs will go up, demand might shrink, you have to relook your hiring as well. And I think the uncertainty over the past year has definitely created more radical uncertainty, has definitely led to firms at least thinking about pausing hiring. That's why we're seeing grads being very worried about jobs. It's not just about AI and whether they can adapt. They are wondering whether the jobs are even there in the first place, because firms might be thinking, let me just wait and see what's going to happen next. But that being said, I would say that living in retrospect, this collapse of the multilateral economic trading order has been kind of there for a while. Like someone who has been watching the WTO, when the WTO Doha round in 2001 didn't pan out very well and reforms to the WTO stalled, there was already a sense of like what is going to happen next, because we have been so dependent on this as Singapore, as Singaporeans. And I think credit also to Singapore for thinking about the next leap, the next bound. And that's why today we have the RCEP, the CPTPP, if you recall the CPTPP and other alphabet soup, ginormous trade agreement started with 4 countries, Brunei, Singapore, New Zealand, Chile. Who would have thought that would grow to the huge giant that it is today? So I think like kudos that we had, like we acknowledge that maybe trading at the multilateral global level is not going to be very possible. What's the next best option? There will be maybe regional arrangements, giant regional arrangements. And then you try to stitch it up with like cross-regional arrangements with the Gulf, with EU, with Mercosur, which you pointed out might be higher risk, but better to diversify. And then we see whether that provides ballast just in case someone decides to turn off the tap. And let me remind you also, turning off the tap is not just a US thing. Any powerful country that might be very angry if another country can turn off the tap when it comes to tourism, when it comes to imports of its seafood, for example.
Critical minerals.
Critical minerals, yes.
But do you think that... Oh, so I hear you on the economic front, like this is what we need to do. But also on the other thing about whether we, as a very small country, will be taken over? Will we be invaded? I mean, he didn't invade Venezuela, but he, in a way, kidnapped their leader. So, I mean, what will happen to us if, a big country decides to, say, hey, I have eyes on Singapore? Like, do you think that would happen? Because Trump has kind of like is basically doing whatever he wants, right? Would other countries follow suit? Do you think that that's a possibility? Hard question to answer.
Okay. So first I'll say that's why we need the SAF and National Service. So everyone go and do your National Service.
Yes.
But over and above that, I mean, yes, people talk about the Venezuela sort of case study, right, and what Trump did. But there's a context to that, right? And, I'm not saying that it justifies what Trump did, but it wasn't a case where he woke up one day and decided, I'm going to go and get that leader, right? I think things were building up, very clearly building up, right? I mean, the administration said already, Western Hemisphere. Administration said already, we got issue with drugs. Administration already said that Venezuela is one of the problems with regards to these 2 other priorities that we now have. Again, not to say that you go and blow up ships, that's correct. Parachute the special forces in to tangkap the leader of the country is correct. Not to say that, but again, just we have to be mindful of the context. So you talk about Singapore, I think the context is different. Of course, never say never. I mean, who knows what some weird leader in some weird country might want to do. But at least for now, I think it's a case where let's just say that it's a different context, right? But it also talks about the importance of the deterrence capability of countries. Yeah, there's a reason why we in Singapore have the quality of the military that we have, and continue to spend what we do in order to maintain, if not upscale, that quality. It's not because we're targeting anyone. It's not because we're expecting anyone to target us, but it's the deterrent element there, right? And that continues to be a priority. And, for small countries, I think even more so, right? Even more so. So that would be my reaction to your
I would say that, I'm in 2 minds about this whole focus on the Western Hemisphere, because on the one hand, the laser is not so focused on Asia, but on the other hand, also the laser is not focused on Asia anymore. I think if you talk about the breakdown in the rules of the game and what constitutes international norms on the use of force, I would say that has gone out the window when Russia annexed Crimea, and what happened in the Middle East over the past 3 years, as well as, that conflict that broke out between Thailand and Cambodia as well. Mike is right that norm has been normalized. And I don't think we are any stranger to that. And that is precisely why we invest in a strong and capable SAF. But having said that, sometimes apart from deterrence, it's very important to pay attention to diplomacy. And that's where, Joseph, you talked about how the US has fired warning shots already. They've told you that this is a core interest for them. It doesn't mean that you have to bend to their will, but it does mean that you have to consider their interest and engage. And what that engagement will bear is ultimately up to that country. But the question then is, was that even happening? Was that even taking place?
So I want to point out here that, as in just to sum up what was said earlier, it was like, so Singapore has been working different angles, to deepen and diversify its partnership, friendships, and work on its military. Last year, we became part of the Future of Investment and Trade partnership. So that's the FIT partnership. And we're also expanding our diplomatic footprint. So opening more embassies. I think there's going to be one in Mexico City this year, right?
Yep.
And PM Wong also visited a number of countries. What do you make of this strategy? Like, should we do more? Is this good for now?
Well, I think it's, again, something weird is happening. There's something weird is happening is there could be a tendency for the country to fall into regional blocks.
Okay.
And that is what you don't want. Because if you have different operating systems, you can't have trade. And as a small country that depends on the world to trade, you'll be forced out of trading blocks. So I think that's where connecting to Africa, when Lee Hsien Loong went there in 2023 or so, connecting to Mercosur with the trade deal in that same year is very important, because we don't want to have that protectionist walls be built up around regions. And so we're trying to break that down by connecting across regions. And so that's why I think the inspiration for the Future of Investment and Trade Partnership, FITP, another alphabet soup, is very important because it cuts across many blocks. And I think that must be the approach in today's world.
Yeah. No, I very much agree. I think first and foremost, Singaporeans have to realize that the world is changing. Yeah, for reasons that we discussed earlier. And indeed, it's a world where, great powers are sort of wielding their instruments of power, shall we say, with less consideration for others. Yeah, I think that much is true. The tendency to weaponize interdependence is happening as well. Industrial policy, more nation-focused kind of economic policies, as opposed to more liberal, embrace globalization type policies, becoming more and more prevalent in many countries, not just the Chinas and the US of the world. Yeah. Importantly, for Singapore, we need to realize that great powers are great powers, and they will behave in ways that will advance their interests. And if international law and rules and all that get in the way, they have no qualms shoving that aside or acting blur about
As
it
we have
and
seen,
just
yeah.
show.
Yeah.
Right? And then, you can shout principle, but that's not going to be very helpful in that respect. So this is the nature of the world that we are entering. But it need not be, it's bleaker, but it may not be, may not necessarily be bleak, right? Because there will still be opportunities. Like I said, if we are nimble, if we are prepared to to diversify, but we have to do it in a clear-eyed fashion. Yeah, it's not like shifting supply chains. I had a conversation with a friend who's from industry, and he was telling me, you geopolitical people, you all talk shifting supply chain like as if tomorrow I can change already, right? Whereas the reality, as we all know, is far more complex, far more uncertainty, heavy costs with no clear dividends, right? So these are not easy decisions, but they are decisions that confront us. Yeah. So we have to make sure that we have a clear sense how we are going to move on this issue or that issue, and importantly, try to have a sense of how the issues are connected. They're not siloed; they're all connected.
So I want to move on to another thing that happened at Davos, which was the Board of Peace. So that was another big talking point at Davos, created by Mr. Trump. He's chairing it forever, apparently. Well, that's in the rules of it. And then on paper, it kind of looks like an alternative to the UN, right, the United Nations. Singapore has been invited to join. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said that Singapore is assessing the invitation. Talk me through that. Like, what's happening here? Where some countries are joining, some countries are assessing it, some countries have outrightly said no. What should we make of it?
I mean,
So
where
big
do we
size,
even begin,
Lin.
right?
Sorry?
No, where do we even begin, right? I mean, I think that you have to acknowledge what Trump has basically pointed out, which is the dysfunction of the United Nations. But at the same time, also, it is our best bulwark against bad behavior. And the challenge, though, is that the veto power held by the P5, the permanent members, gets things stuck. And a lot of things cannot move when it comes to conflict resolution, when it comes to tackling aggression. The problem is the veto power. So I think what Trump is trying to do with his Board of Peace is, despite starting from Gaza, he has now broadened it to encompass a lot more, much bigger scope. And so I think the question you have to ask yourself is this truly going to displace the UN? Will it create this more permanent organization of countries that will, create benefits and institutionalize the grouping as a whole? And it becomes a permanent feature of the international system. I think you have to seriously consider it. But here again, it's not clear because it was set up by his son-in-law, and it's tied to Donald Trump as a personality. Will it have the backing of another party that might come to power in the US after Mr. Trump? Would it still have the backing if his party stays in power? It's not very clear. And here I think there are not very much benefits of being first. It's one of those things where you don't want to be first, you don't want to be last, maybe in the middle, then you can give your answer. You don't need to stick out now. I think you can wait to let the dust settle and then decide for yourself. I think it's a tricky situation. I think we are studying the matters pretty okay response.
I mean, some of our neighbors have, either joined or said they're intending to join the Board of Peace, like Indonesia, I believe, is already on it. What is it in it for them to do so?
Well, you got to ask them.
I'll call
No,
later.
I think there's an element of prestige or perceived prestige on the part of some countries. FOMO, fear of missing out, right? There's an element of prioritizing good relations with the US, or rather good relations with Donald Trump above other considerations. So I think different countries have different, and then there's also the interest of not getting in the crosshairs of President Trump, right? After one day, the fella call up, why are you not joining? How come you haven't give the response? Then a bit leceh, right? So there's all this, right? But I think Suling mentioned some very important unresolved issues with regards to the Board of Peace. I mean, it's very much tied to President Trump for one, and not even him as president. It's tied to Donald Trump, the man, right? Begs a lot of questions, right? If the Republicans, for a reason, lose the election, midterms, Trump himself, I think even living forever may be a bit beyond his abilities, although he might think that he can. What happens, in the future? The question of the UN. I mean, the UN is anything but a perfect multilateral institution, right? It has a lot of problems, but it's there, and it's legitimate, and it does its best within its constraints. UN struggles to handle Gaza, for sure. Will the Board of Peace do any better? I'm not too sure. Right, I think the situation in Gaza and then the larger Israeli-Palestinian situation has reached a point where, I mean, I try not to use the word intractable, but it is a very, very difficult dynamic to manage, let alone resolve, let alone build that wonderful city, Riviera, that Jared Kushner imagined with nary any input from Palestinians, by the way. So it is a tall order for the Board of Peace. So in that respect, I think that even as we, Singapore, think through whether or not to join the board, the impetus probably is not resolving the Gaza problem, because the Board of Peace is not the path to the resolution of this problem. Yeah, Hamas, for example, is going to be there, permanent feature, if you ask me. Hamas or a Hamas-like organization. Good luck trying to disarm and get rid of them. Yeah, so it's not going to be a path for a solution. Joining or not joining is going to be about other things, including signaling, to various parties.
Actually, just picking up that point, bilateral considerations will definitely be the key reason why countries join. But the overall effect, interestingly, because many European countries have said no, many US, Asian allies have said no, the sum effect, actually, if you see who's on the Board of Peace, is the Global South. And if you talk about how in recent years there have been a lot of conversations about how Russia and China are making inroads in engaging the Global South, ignored by the US, it is quite interesting that the people that are coming to the table are the Global South. And is this a counterweight to, say, the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement that Russia and China are in, or even, the BRICS? I think that would be something I watch.
Actually, that's an interesting point, because if you sort of put a different spin to it, it's a diplomatic effort on the part of the US, the Trump administration, to sort of rally the Global South, which was a bit of a chink in the armor for the US. It's just unfortunate that he chose Board of Peace and Gaza as the pathway to that, right? So that just makes it a bit sort of beyond the pale. But interesting observation.
We'll see how it goes from here. But I wanted to end off with this, is that all this is coming, where we're at right now is because, President Trump is pursuing this America First approach, even if it unsettles like long-standing partnerships. And we're seeing this play out in like real time, right? So what is the options for the rest of us? Is it to wait out the term? Or do other countries need to consider that this will be American policy from here on out? And for Singapore, what other cards do we have left to play after we play diplomacy, make new friends, do everything else we can? Like, what else can we do?
So I feel like the answer should not be like, do we get along? Do we tahan for the next 3 years? Because I don't think it's in our blood to tahan. I think that our mantra is to adapt and to find new opportunities and to get on the train. And I think, like, even though there might be some sentiments within some segments that feel this is very unsavory, Trump is very unconventional, he's very brusque, the reality is that the US is the most powerful economic powerhouse on earth. And I think that we do need to tie our sails to the US economy. I think we need to find new opportunities. That's the reason why we're on Pax Silica. That's the reason why we're part of the Quantum Initiative. That's the reason why we have all these bilateral agreements on nuclear and whatnot with the US. And I think we do see opportunities there. That's why Temasek is also looking at its portfolio in the US, right? They've put more money there. So I think it's more like, what are the opportunities that we can truly leverage in the Trump America First? Much as the politics of it is very noisy, I think Trump is here to stay. I think Trump is here to stay because a lot of his policies have been enacted in the trade agreements, the poison pill clauses, the ethos of governance is there. Even after he goes, there's going to be a MAGA base. The Republicans have a couple of successors waiting in the wings. We don't know who will be. It's still too early, but I do think that it is a feature of the international system as we move forward. It will be America first. And oddly, if you step back and think about 1 year ago, it almost feels like we are closer to a unipolar situation than 1 year ago, when everybody was saying, is the US a tired superpower? But I don't know. What do you think, Joseph?
Yeah. No, I've always thought that a lot of people have miscalculated when they assumed that the US was in decline, let alone terminal decline. There are some people who thought that the US was in terminal decline. I mean, the irony of the situation now is Trump wants to make America great again because he feels that America is no longer great, or I don't know, never been great, or whatever it is. But the reality is he's only able to get the reaction and the responses, people sort of scrambling to show the US where they can, work with them and contribute and all that sort of stuff. The only reason why he can achieve that effect is because of the amount of power and influence that the United States has accumulated since the Second World War, at least, if not before that, right? So I always thought that was profoundly ironic. But the reality, and again, I have to agree with Suling, Trumpism is here to stay, even though Trump himself, may not stay. And this suggests, again, a very different United States that we have grown familiar with. Whatever personal views we have about Trump the person, and a lot of people have personal views about him, that cannot be the basis of dealing with the US as the largest economy and the largest military and tech power in the world, right? It would be foolish for leaders of countries and companies to deal with the United States on that basis. Yeah, we have to take it as it is that the US still has this influence, and we have to factor that into all the decisions that we make. Yeah. So MAGA is going to be. It may not be the same form that we see now or we saw when it first arose a few years ago. It might evolve, just as the Tea Party had evolved pre-MAGA days, partly into MAGA. Yeah. But the fundamental premise that the United States cannot be bearing the burden and paying the cost for the rest of the world at the expense of the American people, that cast of mind, that narrative is going to be around long after Trump himself decides that, okay, I've had enough.
And on that sobering note, yeah, I know that was a reality check, Joseph. But thank you both for being here and that conversation. I hope we gave people, some food for thought about can't really cut off the US right there. But so we'll have you back on when Trump is on another world stage saying something else. But thank you both for being here. And that's it from The Usual Place today. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you won't miss the next episode. And if you have thoughts on what we just discussed today, do drop a comment on YouTube or talk to me on Instagram at The Usual Place Podcast. I'll see you next week on Thursday at noon.